The safety of average. Mediocrity rarely announces itself. It does not look dramatic. It does not look reckless. It looks reasonable, comfortable, balanced. Average feels safe. If you perform at the middle, you avoid scrutiny. If you aim moderately, you avoid pressure. If you stay within the norm, you avoid isolation. Excellence changes your position. When you rise above average, you become visible. Visibility invites evaluation. Evaluation invites comparison. Comparison invites judgment. Judgment feels threatening. So many people unconsciously cap effort, not because they lack ability, but because they fear exposure. Average performance protects ego. If you never try fully, you never fully fail. If you never push limits, you never test capacity. Testing capacity risks discovering that you are not exceptional, or worse, that you are capable of more than you are currently living. More capability means more responsibility. Responsibility increases pressure. Pressure feels heavy. Mediocrity reduces pressure. In an environment where criticism is amplified, staying average feels rational. You avoid being a target. You avoid envy. You avoid expectation. Expectation is demanding. If people expect little, your mistakes are tolerated. If people expect excellence, your errors are magnified. Magnified error feels humiliating, so many settle before they even attempt. Not because they cannot rise, because rising costs comfort. Mediocrity blends in. Blending in feels socially safe. Excellence separates. Separation feels isolating. Isolation triggers insecurity. Insecurity encourages retreat. Retreat reinforces average. There is also a cultural factor. In some environments, ambition is interpreted as arrogance. High standards are seen as pressure. Refusing average is viewed as judgment. So lowering effort becomes socially protective. You do not intimidate anyone. You do not threaten hierarchy. You do not expose inconsistency. But safety has a cost. It limits growth. It limits leverage. It limits possibility. Excellence requires risk. Risk of failure. Risk of criticism. Risk of visibility. Risk of responsibility. Those risks feel heavy. Average feels lighter, but lighter does not mean better. It means easier. And easy rarely transforms. Many people are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of exposure. Exposure reveals effort. Exposure reveals limitation. Exposure reveals potential. Potential is intimidating because once you recognize it, you are responsible for developing it. Developing it requires discipline. Discipline removes excuses. Excuses protect comfort. Comfort preserves mediocrity. This is why mediocrity feels safer. It demands less. It expects less. It risks less. But it also delivers less. Less growth, less leverage, less freedom. Excellence is not flashy. It is consistent. It is disciplined. It is exposed. Exposure is uncomfortable. Comfort avoids exposure, and avoiding exposure keeps you average. Excellence increases visibility. When you improve, people notice. When you rise, attention follows. Visibility is a byproduct of excellence, and visibility changes the environment around you. When you remain average, you are rarely examined. Your mistakes are overlooked. Your effort is assumed. Your outcomes blend into the background. But when you stand out, everything sharpens. Performance is measured. Consistency is expected. Improvement is tracked. Visibility introduces pressure. Pressure exposes weakness. Weakness feels vulnerable. Vulnerability feels unsafe. So many unconsciously reduce performance to reduce visibility. It is not always conscious sabotage. It is protection. Protection from scrutiny. Protection from expectation. Protection from being held to a higher standard. Higher standards are demanding. Once you prove capacity, people expect repetition. Repetition requires discipline. Discipline requires energy. Energy requires sacrifice. Sacrifice removes comfort. Comfort is easy. Excellence is heavy. There is also social visibility. When you improve dramatically, you shift relational dynamics. Peers may feel comparison. Comparison can produce tension. Tension feels isolating. Isolation is uncomfortable. So many regulate their growth to maintain relational stability. They do not outpace their environment. They do not rise too quickly. They do not risk being too much. Visibility can also invite criticism when you are average. When you excel, critics appear. Criticism tests resilience. Resilience requires maturity. Maturity requires exposure. Exposure is precisely what mediocrity avoids. Excellence also narrows excuses. If you demonstrate talent, underperformance cannot be blamed on ability. It must be blamed on effort. Effort is within your control. Control increases responsibility. Responsibility feels heavy, so it can feel safer never to prove too much. If expectations remain low, failure feels tolerable. If expectations are high, failure feels amplified. Amplified failure threatens identity. Identity preservation is powerful. The mind will choose safety over exposure. If not trained otherwise, visibility also improves anonymity. Anonymity feels safe. You can experiment quietly. You can underperform without consequences. You can retreat unnoticed. Excellence removes anonymity. You become reference. You become example. You become a target. Target attracts attention. Attention magnifies pressure. Pressure tests character. Character requires consistency. Consistency is demanding. Many people say they want success. Few want the exposure that comes with it. Exposure requires internal stability. If your self-worth is fragile, visibility feels dangerous because criticism cuts deeper. Comparison feels harsher. Expectation feels heavier. So the safer route, it's remaining in the middle. Not too low to feel ashamed, not too high to feel exposed, just enough to feel stable. But stability built on avoidance is fragile. It depends on staying unseen. Excellence builds a different stability, one rooted in competence. Competence builds confidence. Confidence absorbs criticism. Absorbing criticism strengthens resilience. Resilience stabilizes identity. Stabilized identity tolerates visibility, but that process requires deliberate exposure. It requires stepping forward, despite discomfort, despite scrutiny, despite judgment. Mediocrity avoids judgment. Excellence accepts it. That acceptance feels risky. But risk is the price of leverage. Leverage increases opportunity. Opportunity increases mobility. Mobility increases freedom. So the choice becomes clear. Remain unseen and comfortable, or become visible and capable. Visibility is not the goal. Capability is, but capability will eventually be seen. And being seen is what many are unconsciously avoiding. Visibility increases pressure. Pressure is not the enemy, but it feels like one. When you remain average, pressure is low. Expectations are modest. Performance is flexible. Mistakes are forgettable. But once you demonstrate excellence, pressure increases. Pressure says, can you do it again? Can you maintain this? Can you improve further? Those questions feel heavy because consistency is harder than breakthrough. Anyone can peak once. Few can sustain it. Sustaining excellence requires discipline. Discipline requires sacrifice. Seriousness removes excuses. Excuses protect comfort. Comfort resists pressure. Pressure also exposes insecurity. If you secretly doubt your ability, success creates anxiety because success raises the bar, and raising the bar increases the risk of failing, of falling too. The fear is not failure itself. It is public failure. Failure when everyone is watching. Failure after being praised. Failure after being evaluated. Failure after being elevated. That kind of fall feels humiliating. So some people unconsciously limit their rise. If you never climb too high, you never fall too far. Mediocrity feels stable. Excellence feels volatile. There is also internal pressure. When you know you are capable of more, doing less creates tension. That tension requires action. Action requires effort. Effort requires energy. Energy requires focus. Focus requires discipline. Discipline requires discomfort. It is easier to quiet the tension by lowering your standards. Lower standards reduce pressure. Reduced pressure feels peaceful, but it is not growth. Pressure also disrupts social equilibrium. When you excel, others adjust around you. Some celebrate, some compete, some resent. Resentment is uncomfortable. It creates friction. Friction challenges belonging. Belonging is powerful. Humans are wired for it. So many choose social safety over personal excellence. It is not laziness. It is fear of disconnection. Excellence can separate. Separation feels isolating. Isolation increases emotional pressure. Emotional pressure tests identity. If identity is fragile, pressure feels overwhelming. Fragile identity avoids exposure. Avoiding exposure maintains mediocrity. There is another subtle pressure. Success changes narrative. If you succeed once, you must now identify as capable. Capable identity requires consistent action. Consistent action requires maturity. Maturity requires self-regulation. Self-regulation is demanding. You can attribute outcomes to circumstances. Once you excel, circumstance loses credibility. Responsibility increases. Responsibility increases pressure. Pressure tests character. Character determines trajectory. Some people are not afraid of hard work. They are afraid of what hard work reveals. Reveals capacity. Reveals expectation. Reveals potential. Potential creates obligation. Obligation feels heavy. Heavy feels risky. So the mind chooses lighter paths. Lighter paths feel manageable. Manageable feels safe. Safe feels stable. But stability without growth is slow decline. Pressure is not punishment. It is signal. Signal that you are operating at higher levels. Higher levels demand refinement. Refinement demands discipline. Discipline demands seriousness. Seriousness removes casual excuses. Mediocrity protects casualness. Excellence demands commitment. Commitment narrows options. Narrowing options feels restrictive. Restriction feels uncomfortable. So many people say they want success, but what they really want is recognition without pressure. Recognition without responsibility. Visibility without evaluation. That combination does not exist. Visibility always increases pressure. Pressure always tests resilience. Resilience always requires growth. Growth always requires discomfort. Mediocrity bypasses the cycle. It limits exposure. It limits expectation. It limits pressure. But it also limits expansion. The truth is simple. Excellence increases pressure because excellence increases potential. Potential demands accountability. Accountability feels heavy. Heavy feels risky. Risk feels unsafe. And safety is why mediocrity feels comfortable. The fear of being measured. To excel is to be measured. Measured against peers, measured against standards, measured against your own past performance. Measurement feels threatening because measurement reveals hierarchy. Hierarchy reveals difference. Difference creates comparison. Comparison exposes rank. Rank can wound ego. If you remain average, measurement is vague. You are neither clearly above nor clearly below. You blend into the middle. Blending reduces exposure. Exposure increases evaluation. Evaluation invites judgment. Judgment feels personal, even when it is objective. Being measured forces clarity. You cannot hide behind narrative when metrics are visible. You cannot claim effort if results contradict it. You cannot blame context if others in the same context outperform you. Measurement narrows excuses. Excuse reduction feels uncomfortable. Comfort prefers ambiguity. Ambiguity protects self-image. Clarity challenges it. There is a reason people resist strict standards. Standards remove interpretation. They define expectations clearly. Clarity increases accountability. Accountability increases pressure. Pressure tests identity. If identity is fragile, measurement feels like attack. Instead of seeing evaluation as feedback, it feels like exposure. Exposure of insufficiency. Exposure of inconsistency. Exposure of underperformance. Those exposures hurt. So avoiding measurement becomes protective. Some environments reduce standards to reduce discomfort. Everyone passes. Everyone wins. Everyone is affirmed. Affirmation feels good, but it does not build capacity. Capacity is built when weaknesses are identified and corrected. Correction requires measurement. Measurement requires standards. Standards require hierarchy. Hierarchy reveals difference. Difference challenges ego. This is why mediocrity feels socially safer. It reduces comparison intensity. It lowers visibility of gaps. It diffuses competition. Competition feels harsh, but competition clarifies reality. Reality is neutral. It responds to skill. Skill responds to effort. Effort responds to discipline. Discipline responds to standards. Standards require measurement. Avoiding measurement avoids discomfort. Avoiding discomfort avoids growth. There is also fear of being ranked publicly. Public ranking magnifies vulnerability. Private improvement feels safer, but private improvement often requires eventual exposure. Exposure tests authenticity. If your confidence depends on praise, measurement feels destabilizing. If your confidence depends on competence, measurement becomes information. Information is neutral. It can hurt, but it can also guide. Guidance refines performance. Refinement increases mastery. Mastery increases autonomy. Autonomy increases freedom. But the path begins with measurement. Measurement forces confrontation with reality. Reality may contradict your manners. Humility feels vulnerable. Vulnerability feels unsafe. So many choose narrative over measurement. They redefine excellence to fit current performance. They lower standards to avoid exposure. They dismiss metrics as unfair or irrelevant. Sometimes metrics are flawed, but often they are simply uncomfortable. Uncomfortable truth is easier to attack than to accept. Accepting it requires change. Change requires effort. Effort requires discipline. Discipline requires seriousness. Seriousness removes casualness. Mediocrity thrives in casualness. Excellence thrives in clarity. Clarity begins with measurement. If you are never measured, you never refine. If you never refine, you never master. If you never master, you never expand leverage. Leverage expands opportunity. Opportunity increases freedom. Freedom requires exposure to evaluation. The fear of being measured is fear of being known. Known in strengths, known in weaknesses, known in limits, known in potential. Potential is the heaviest weight because once it is visible, it must be pursued or consciously abandoned. Abandoning potential feels like loss. Pursuing potential feels like pressure. Pressure feels risky. Risk feels unsafe. So mediocrity offers an escape. Stay unmeasured, stay undefined, stay average, and you avoid the sting of clarity. But you also avoid the expansion that clarity enables. Measurement is not humiliation, it is direction. Direction is uncomfortable, but without direction, drift becomes permanent. And drift is the quiet cost of avoiding standards. Why standards feel oppressive? Standards define expectation. Expectation defines effort. Effort reveals difference. Difference creates hierarchy. Hierarchy makes some people uncomfortable. When standards are high, performance is separated clearly. Separation feels harsh. It feels exclusive. It feels unequal. If you do not meet the standard, you are visibly below it. Visibility of inadequacy is painful. Pain feels unfair. So the mind reframes the standard. The standard becomes rigid. The standard becomes unrealistic. The standard becomes oppressive. Sometimes standards are unreasonable, but often they are simply demanding. Demanding feels threatening. When comfort has been normalized, comfort prefers flexibility. Standards require discipline. Discipline requires consistency. Consistency requires sacrifice. Sacrifice feels restrictive. Restriction feels like control. Control feels oppressive. But there is a difference between external control and self-imposed control. External oppression removes choice. Self-discipline increases capacity. Capacity increases choice. The two are not the same. When someone holds a high standard, it creates contrast. Contrast exposes variance. Variance challenges comfort. If you are used to blending in, standing next to excellence feels destabilizing. Destabilization creates defensiveness. Defensiveness reframes the standard as unfair. It is easier to attack the benchmark than to rise toward it. Rising requires effort. Effort requires discipline. Discipline requires delayed gratification. Delayed gratification feels slow. Slow progress feels unrewarded in a culture of immediacy. Immediacy prefers validation. Standards prefer refinement. Refinement is repetitive. Repetition is boring. Boredom feels restrictive. Restriction is mislabeled oppression. There is also social comparison. If one person performs exceptionally, others are measured against it. Measurement invites discomfort. Discomfort invites critique. Critique invites resistance. Resistance reframes the expectation as harmful. But high standards are not harm. They are signals. Signals of what is possible. Possibility is intimidating because possibility removes excuses. If someone else can achieve it, your limitations become less defensible. So the standard is questioned, not because it is impossible, but because it is demanding. Demanding standards reduce emotional comfort. Comfort has become a priority. When comfort is primary, anything that creates strain feels unjust. Strain is necessary for growth. Muscle grows through strain. Skill grows through repetition. Competence grows through correction. Correction feels critical. Criticism feels personal. Personal discomfort feels oppressive, but discomfort is not domination. It is development. Another factor is identity. If identity centers on equality of outcome, different feel threatening. Standards produce difference. Difference produces hierarchy. Hierarchy produces rank. Rank feels unequal. Unequal feels unfair. Unfair feels oppressive. But excellence is not inherently exclusionary. It is aspirational. It says this level is possible. It does not say you are permanently below. It says you can rise. Rising requires effort. Effort requires discipline. Discipline requires seriousness. Seriousness feels heavy in a culture that prioritizes comfort. Affirmation feels kind, but affirmation without growth creates stagnation. Stagnation feels stable temporarily, but over time it produces fragility. Fragility requires protection. Protection resists strain. Resisting strain prevents strengthening. Prevented strengthening limits future capacity. High standards are uncomfortable because they expose potential. Potential demands responsibility. Responsibility removes comfort. Comfort resists responsibility, so standards are reframed as oppressive rather than demanded. Demanded is not abusive. Demanding is developmental. Development requires discomfort. Discomfort feels threatening. When resilience is low, resilience grows when discomfort is endured. Endurance strengthens identity. Strengthened identity tolerates standards. Tolerance allows growth. Growth increases leverage. Leverage increases freedom. Standards do not remove freedom. They clarify the path to it. But clarity is uncomfortable. It eliminates ambiguity. Ambiguity protects ego. Clarity demands action. Action requires effort. Effort requires discipline. And discipline is what many are unconsciously avoiding when mediocrity feels safer. The comfort of low expectation. Low expectation feels kind. They feel forgiving. They feel protective. If no one expects much from you, failure carries less sting. If no one anticipates excellence, underperformance feels normal. Normal feels safe. Safe feels stable. But low expectation is not neutral. It shapes behavior. It shapes effort. It shapes your identity. When expectations are low, urgency decreases. If nothing is required, nothing is pursued intensely. Intensity feels risky. Low expectation reduces risk, but it also reduces growth. There is comfort in knowing no one is watching closely. Comfort is knowing no one is measuring progress. Comfort is knowing mediocrity is acceptable. Acceptability, accepting lowers tension. Lower tension reduces drive. Reduced drive limits expansion. Expansion requires pressure. Pressure requires expectation. Expectation requires belief that more is possible. If no one expects more, the mind often stops demanding. Self-expectation weakens when external expectation disappears. And once internal standards soften, performance follows. The comfort of low expectation also protects ego. If little is expected, little is required. If little is required, little failure occurs. If little failure occurs, self-image remains intact. But intact self-image without challenge remains fragile. Fragile identity resists strain. Strain builds strength. Strength increases confidence. Confidence tolerates expectation. Low expectation also prevents exposure to your full capacity. If you never test limits, you never discover range. Range is intimidating because once discovered, it must be developed. Development requires consistency. Consistency requires discipline. Discipline removes comfort. Comfort is appealing. So many unconsciously accept lower expectations to avoid the cost of higher performance. There is also a social layer. If you outperform consistently, others may feel comparison. Comparison creates tension. Tension threatens belonging. Belonging feels essential, so lowering visible ambition can feel relationally safe. If you stay within the average band, no one feels exposed by contrast. You are easier to accept, but acceptance at the cost of potential is expensive. Low expectation also distorts time. If growth is optional, improvement can wait. Waiting becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. Identity shapes trajectory. Trajectory shapes life. Low expectation is subtle. It does not announce itself as self-sabotage. It presents as realism. As long as I am okay, as long as I am comfortable, as long as I am stable. Stability without challenge is slow decline. Decline rarely feels dramatic. It feels gradual, barely noticeable, but years of low expectation create skill gaps. Skill gaps reduce opportunity. Reduced opportunity reinforces narrative. Narrative becomes limitation. Limitation feels imposed, but it was chosen through avoidance of expectation. There is also fear of disappointing others. If expectations are high, mistakes feel magnified. Low expectation reduces perceived stakes. Reduced stakes feel calming, but high stakes create urgency. Urgency drives focus. Focus builds mastery. Mastery increases leverage. Leverage expands options. Options increase freedom. Low expectation narrows that path. The comfort is immediate. The cost is long-term. People often say they feel stuck. But stuck rarely comes from impossibility. It often comes from insufficient expectation. No demand, no stretch, no pressure. Without stretch, capacity plateaus. Plateau feels calm. Calm feels safe. But plateau prevents ascent. Ascent requires strain. Strain requires expectation. Expectation requires belief that you are capable of more. Belief in more creates responsibility. Responsibility removes excuses. Excuses restore comfort. Comfort sustains mediocrity. Low expectation feels humane, but long term it robs you of potential. Potential unrealized becomes regret. Regret feels heavier than pressure ever did. Pressure builds strength. Regret builds resentment. Resentment builds grievance. Grievance reinforces stagnation. The comfort of low expectation is seductive, but it quietly trades future freedom for present ease, and ease rarely creates excellence. Excellence is lonely. Excellence separates. Not always dramatically, but consistently. When you commit to higher standards, your schedule changes, your habits change, your tolerance for distraction changes, and sometimes your relationships change. When you pursue excellence, you cannot participate in everything. You cannot indulge every impulse. You cannot stay comfortable in every environment. That separation feels isolating. Isolation is uncomfortable. Humans are wired for belonging. Belonging is powerful. It regulates emotion. It creates safety. It reduces anxiety. Excellence often disrupts belonging. If your friends are casual and you become disciplined, the gap becomes visible. If your environment tolerates mediocrity and you reject it, contrast appears. Contrast creates tension. Tension threatens connection. Connection is precious. So many unconsciously lower standards to preserve relationships. They do not rise too high. They do not push too hard. They do not demand too much. Because demanding more can feel like criticism of others, even when it is not. Excellence can unintentionally expose stagnation around you. Exposure makes people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people may withdraw. Withdrawal feels like rejection. Rejection hurts. So mediocrity becomes relationally safer. There is also internal loneliness. When you set high standards for yourself, you often spend time alone. Alone training, alone studying, alone refining, alone resisting distraction, alone building. That solitude feels heavy. While others relax, you work. While others celebrate casually, you stay disciplined. That difference creates emotional friction. It can feel unfair. It can feel isolated. It can feel exhausting. Mediocrity avoids that tension. It allows immediate inclusion, immediate validation, immediate participation. Excellence delays gratification. Delayed gratification increases isolation. Isolation increases doubt. Doubt tempts retreat. Retreat returns you to average. Average restores belonging. Belonging feels comforting. Comfort feels right. But comfort can quietly sabotage growth. There is another form of loneliness. When you elevate your standards, fewer people understand your urgency. Fewer people share your intensity. Fewer people relate to your focus. That difference creates distance. Distance feels alienating. Alienation challenges identity. Identity seeks stability. Stability can be found in returning to familiar levels. But returning to familiar levels means shrinking potential. Shrinking potential feels safe in the short term, but costly in the long term. Excellence also increases responsibility. When you rise, others may depend on you. Dependence increases weight. Weight feels heavy. Heavy feels isolating because fewer people share the burden. Mediocrity distributes weight evenly. Excellence concentrates it. Concentration increases pressure. Pressure tests resilience. Resilience requires internal strength. Internal strength is built alone. Alone time builds depth. Depth builds mastery. Mastery builds leverage. Leverage builds freedom. But the path includes loneliness. Many people are not afraid of work. They are afraid of isolation. They fear becoming different. They fear losing shared comfort. They fear standing apart. Standing apart invites attention. Attention invites judgment. Judgment invites insecurity. Insecurity tempts retreat. So the safer path is staying within the collective average. But the collective average rarely produces exceptional outcomes. Excellence does not reject people. It requires different priorities. Different priorities reduce overlap. Reduced overlap creates separation. Separation feels lonely. But loneliness in pursuit of growth is different than isolation in stagnation. One builds strength, the other builds regret. Regret often emerges years later when comfort fades, when comparison resurfaces, when opportunity feels distant. And then the loneliness of mediocrity feels heavier than the loneliness of excellence ever did. Excellence is lonely because it demands seriousness. Seriousness narrows distractions. Narrowing distractions limits participation. Limited participation changes belonging. But it also builds capacity. Capacity builds confidence. Confidence reduces dependence. Reduced dependence strengthens identity. Strengthened identity tolerates separation. The question is not whether excellence is lonely. It is. The question is which loneliness you choose, the loneliness of growth or the loneliness of regret. Choose the risk. Mediocrity feels unsafe. It reduces pressure. It reduces visibility. It reduces expectation. But it also reduces possibility. Excellence feels risky. It increases scrutiny. It increases responsibility. It increases exposure. But it also increases leverage. You cannot avoid risk. You can only choose which risk to carry. The risk of trying and failing publicly, or the risk of never trying and failing privately. The risk of standing out, or the risk of blending in and becoming forgettable. The risk of discipline, or the risk of regret. Mediocrity protects you from embarrassment, but it cannot protect you from stagnation. Stagnation is quiet. It accumulates slowly. It rarely announces itself until years pass, and the gap between potential and reality becomes visible. That gap is heavy, heavier than criticism ever was, heavier than pressure ever felt. Excellence demands something from you: time, focus, energy, consistency. It may cost comfort. It may cost convenience. It may cost approval from people who preferred you average, but it builds capacity. Capacity builds confidence. Confidence absorbs pressure. Pressure refines skill. Skill expands opportunity. Opportunity increases freedom. The path is clear. Average is easier. Excellence is heavier. But average keeps you small. Excellence expands you. Small feels safe. Expansion feels exposed. Exposure feels risky. Risk is the price of growth. You will be lonely at times. You will be measured. You will be judged. You will be pressured. You will also be capable. And capability is what creates leverage in every environment. You do not need to be perfect. You need to be serious. Serious about discipline. Serious about standards. Serious about growth. The world does not need more average. It needs more people willing to tolerate the pressure of excellence. Choose the risk of growth, the risk of exposure, the risk of being measured, because the greater risk is spending your life comfortable and capable of more. Thank you. God bless you. Bye-bye. Transforming people's lives. The Kingdom Sanctuary of Eden and Outreach Ministries. With our clothing bins all over, we're collecting clothes and shoes and giving it out to all in the communities, in the cities, and all over the world. Wherever there's a need, the Kingdom Sanctuary of Eden is there to fulfill it. Please continue all your donations, whether it be clothes, food, shoes, or monetary donations, so we can take care of God's people all over the world. The donation starts with you. Let's build the kingdom together.